Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one is going to be for Sword Art Online Progressive Volume 7. So it's been another large break between progressive volumes. I think it's been like 2+ years since Volume 6 came out. And then Volume 5 and 6, which cover, the previous floor, there was a 2-year break before them as well. Now, Volume 8 is coming, I think in May is the English translation release, so we don't have too long to wait, and hopefully it'll be a bit quicker after that, but it has been quite a while. And I think my general thoughts on this volume are that this is definitely, I think, the weakest volume of Progressive. It's still enjoyable, don't get me wrong. If you like Progressive, you are still going to fundamentally like the dynamic at play here between Kirito, Asuna. Argo's involved here, you get a bit of Kismel towards the end, and some of the, plots related to this floor, floor 7, are good. The problem with this is that this is the book that is the most heavily set up for the next volume. Where this book ends, it just feels very much come on. Really? You're going to end it right there and make me wait for Volume 8? It's I get it. They seem to be switching to two books per floor. The problem is that he's doing that, when I don't really think there's any real, necessary justification for it as such, because I think more significant stuff has happened on previous floors when only one book covered the floor. And so it's just this thing of he's expanding out the story here, but he's expanding stories that I think are less interesting than certain other ones. I hope this is not going to be the sort of trend going forward, is that each floor just gets progressively bigger and bigger, and so it's 3 books for floor 8, and then floor 10, which of course we're waiting for, that's the big kind of hype floor early on, I guess. Is that going to be 5 volumes or something like that? I really would like him to just get back to the way things were from volume 1, 2, 3, 4. Because the big thing with this is that in terms of pure takeaways, just in volume 7, what happens? It's so easy to just bullet point go this happens, then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And it's not that much. A lot of the other books are sort of just packed with tons and tons of interesting things. This feels like it actually has a little bit of almost filler content, or the scenes that are usually sort of interesting in the other volumes are just not as interesting in this one. A lot of those sort of just transition scenes of they need to get from the entrance to the town, so they have to go through a route which involves fighting some monsters. They do that basically sort of twice in this book, and I don't think either of those times of basically Kirito and Asuna fight the monsters on the floor are very interesting sections, because sure, he tries to come up with a gimmick for this monster has an interesting attack pattern and we have to get by it, but fundamentally they're not going to have a problem with the combat here, either of them. And then the next one, they're more dealing with the environment, but again, they can fight their way out, no real problem, and it's just to collect some items fundamentally, and that's really it. There's a lot of stuff like that. It's not the shortest volume of Progressive, but it feels like it's the shortest because relatively little happens. So this is the casino floor. I think we had some sense that was going to be the case. It was kind of alluded to before. And it's mentioned that in the beta, when Kirito got to this floor, he lost basically everything on this floor and had to build his way back up to progress further. This was the floor that lost a lot of the beta testing population because they lost so much of their gear betting. Surprisingly, the book doesn't actually delve into the casino that much. We are there. The kind of NPC main story quest relates to it, but it's more this new element that wasn't in the beta of the monster coliseum that players can bet on. Bet on which of these 2 monsters will win the fight, rather than, what you maybe expected the book to be, Kirito and Asuna kind of winning, then losing, then winning again, on the kind of more standard kind of gambling stuff. they don't end up really doing any of that because the book is very focused on this quest that they do with Argo, because Argo is obviously trying to figure out the main story quest to help the other players when they get here, and figure that stuff out for her guidebook. And then Asuna, of course, is very invested in the Elf War quest line, so we have to get back to that. And what ends up happening is just that you get very much the opening section of the quest, story quest. You get the opening section of this stage of the Elf War quest, and that's really about it. You can sort of tell, and I think he sort of alludes to it in the afterword, that like he's sort of like, sorry again for another 2-volume floor, but I thought this one was just gonna be a quick fun times at the casino, then they go hang out at the beach based on their winnings, but it actually developed into something more. And it's like, okay, fine, Volume 8 should be pretty exciting, but we'll see what happens. It's just frustrating that like we are still like effectively like 3-4 months away from the next volume. This one just didn't really feel satisfying where it did end off. So let's get into some of the details. Effectively, the first 50 pages is just sort of like the reintroduction. They do go over what gear they have and like what level it's at and stuff like that, which is kind of fun. And they get across that they're in like the early 20s in terms of levels, both of them. And Kirito then explains that, okay, here's some of the stuff with this floor. It's very hot. There's 2 paths we can take from this sort of entrance area. One is an easy path that will take us over to this area away from the casino. There's a harder path that will take us to the casino, which is typically the main notable area of this floor. I think they do also get across that the easier path gets them straight to basically where the labyrinth and the boss is. So the casino very much is sort of a side venture. So they end up doing that. Kirito has to convince her because he explains, of course, that, oh, I lost everything here, but I still think we should go. And I think you'll want to go as well because one of the things you can win is that basically the casino is effectively like attached to a beach. But you can only go to the beach if you win at the casino. And so Asuna does want to go to the beach, so that's part of why they go there. Now, they don't actually end up trying to really win anything, so the whole beach thing feels like they're going to get that as a reward for completing the quest more than actually doing any gambling or anything like that. But it's basically just they arrive at the town. Like I said, they go up the road to get there first. They fight some kind of flying insect monsters, and it's only about 10 pages, but it feels just like these pages weren't really needed. It's just some basic monsters. You say you encounter a couple of them. They have this attack pattern where they attack basically almost like straight down immediately, and then they continue to get kind of closer and closer to the horizontal. So you have to wait a bit to attack them effectively. They get a healing crystal, the first healing crystal that they've got, and Kirito does explain the healing crystals to Asuna, so that is significant. A rare drop this early on. We know they're a thing from, of course, like the anime, later floors, but here's the first one. So they end up saying like they kill like 10-15 of these monsters on the road, and they only get the one healing crystal. So that was just a really quick, side plot. There's like no real skills or anything like that used. It's just effectively a way to introduce the healing crystal, which hasn't come into play yet. They don't use it in this volume. I think they're maybe setting up that maybe in the next volume Asuna might need to use the healing crystal, because they do explain that Kirito convinces Asuna, you should be the one to hold it, because the way they fight typically is that Kirito does a lot of the upfront stuff. Asuna then sort of is this sort of secondary switch in from the back, but Kirito is the one often, blocking the attacks and stuff like that. So it makes more sense for their partnership, Asuna, who's in danger less often, for her to have the healing crystal. So that is their responsibility, and it's kind of like, when will she use it? When will she have to use a healing crystal? Maybe boss fight on the upcoming floor. Maybe some PK stuff will come into play and she'll have to heal Kirito. Who knows? But they get to the casino floor. they mainly focus on just like where they're going to eat initially, and there's a few pages just describing the food on the floor. Then they get a message. They message Argo. She says she'll meet them in this specific restaurant shortly. They go there again. More food talk here. They share food together, and then we get into like Argo explains this new flower that she found that basically cools drinks down, but also gives you a debuff, which I guess will also come into play. There's a few things like that on this floor that they do introduce. This flower, there's a kind of elf fruit as well. I think it's like narco fruit or something like that. That also has a kind of buff. They're two separate buffs. One is like heat resistance. The other's like shock/stun resistance. So I'm guessing some combination of them will come into play for the boss fight. That's the main sort of setup here. Argo then basically introduces the idea of like, okay, I'll give you this information for free if you help me with this quest. We need multiple people for it, and obviously I can't do that on my own. And this is the main sort of story quest in terms of helping the casino deal with some cheating that's been going on. So Argo's progressed as far as she can, but she can't progress this next step, which is they have to go to the Monster Coliseum, which is the new area in the final game. So Kirito has no knowledge about the monster arena. There's a sort of interesting thing of like Asuna and Kirito take off relatively early on, so they should be some of the first people to get there. But when they arrive at the casino, the two main guilds are already there and have been doing some gambling and have made some money. So they've obviously got some sort of plan in mind. They don't delve too much into it, but you know that's what's going on. They later reveal they're doing like the kind of like opposite quest where they get the sort of cheating booklet and like get tips on gambling, whereas Kirito, Asuna, and Argo are actually doing the quest to sort of stop the cheating. So that is an interesting dynamic. This is where you get introduced to the sort of NPCs on this floor, which are fine, but I don't find them like incredibly interesting. You could see here just the kind of the maid and then the person related to the family who sort of incorporated the Monster Coliseum onto the floor. Basically, they witness one of the fights, and the quest is one of the monsters is cheating somehow. Figure it out. So it's this sort of dog-based monster against this kind of insect-based monster. The dog monster ends up winning, and it seems like a relatively fair fight. They have no clue what actually happened immediately. It's like, was it one of the attacks? No. Then Kirito notices the sort of blood splatter, but then he's like, wait, this game doesn't really have blood splatter, so that must be something else, and it's some sort of a dye or paint, and this progresses the quest. They go to the NPCs to tell them this, and Kirito's conclusion is that this dog monster has dyed its fur to look like a lower level version of that monster. We then go into, we get some details on how the Monster Coliseum fighting works, which is that the monsters are meant to be of a similar kind of fighting level. So it is a way to cheat by sort of sending in a monster that is clearly much more powerful than the other one, and that's what's happened here. So the sort of they get across the idea that there's one specific family that is important to the lore of this floor. Two brothers, and they took different paths in approaching things, and so one side of the family supplies one of the monsters, the other side of the family supplies one of the monsters, and the young girl sort of NPC here is the current kind of one side of the family, and she says the other side is cheating. So we get that, and they're basically just told, okay, go out, find these two items as to make basically a dye remover to kind of out the cheating. And I think probably my biggest criticism of this kind of plot point is that we get to that point, we basically have the dye thing made, and the book ends right before they're actually going to, use do the next stage of the quest. So you very much only get the introductory section of this sort of Monster Coliseum quest line here as we go through it. We do go back to the NPCs like a couple of times, but fundamentally that is the core of what happens. And that gets us up to like basically like the halfway point in the book, which is, like I said, first 50 pages are just getting to the 10. Next 50 pages are that first stage of figuring out the quest. The third quarter of the book, 100 to 150, are more or less, here is your elf war questline section of the book, which is that they realize, okay, to get the items needed for this quest, it actually brings us into the area where we can start the elf war questline. So they go there to the dark elf territory here, and they're immediately arrested. And it's part of the quest, which is that Kirito, Asuna, and Kismel are basically blamed for all the keys getting stolen on the previous floor. So they get arrested and put in prison, and they're told, like, escape, basically. That's part of the quest. So they do this kind of cool thing where they do... I suppose there is a little bit of setup before here. The path to get to the Elf War quest line is the other path that I said. This was the more environmental one. It's called like Loose Rock kind of road. And effectively it's just you have to count the number of rocks. The like sort of like 6 before are loose and you'll slip and fall down into like a ravine. The 7th one is solid and you just have to step on all the solid rocks. Which goes fine because Kirito knows the trick. But then Asuna sort of loses concentration, she falls, they have to fight a horde of monsters. It basically is there to reveal the dynamic that it's dark in this path. And if you put a torch on, it makes the sort of natural kind of glow-in-the-dark plants go out. So the key is to just go in and use the natural lighting, which they also use inside the dark elf kind of headquarters. And they use that to their advantage here because they realize the only way to get out of the prison is they're going to have to burn the wooden bars of their prison. But if they do that, they'll put out the lights and alert everyone that what's going on. So they have to do this quick thing where Asuna keeps watch and Kirito kind of quickly lights it on fire, extinguishes it, and they keep doing that over and over again. So the sort of reaction of big firelight turns off the glow-in-the-dark stuff doesn't happen. They eventually break out, they get their weapons, including some other weapons that are there. This is when they encounter a dark elf prisoner who is a dark elf, and his name is was it Lavik, I think, and they reveal some kind of lore here related to the dark elves where he's related to Yoflis from like one of the previous floors, and I guess they had a fight at some point, and that's why that of the kind of brothers is in charge, whereas the guy they meet, Lavix here, is actually the elder brother of them. And then they reveal that the blacksmith that has helped them on the previous floor, the elf blacksmith, he's like the younger brother. So they're building up the elf kind of stuff here. Asuna revealing her sword is what kind of gets him on their side. So they break him out by giving him his sword back. He's been in prison for like 30 years. So they break out together. And this is all ultimately to try and get to Kismel. And what's interesting is that they introduce Lavix, and then basically it's like smash cut to, and so we broke Kismel out from the top of the headquarters. Like they don't cover the idea of like they go up there, find her, get her out. It's like, no, we're already on the way out with Kismel. We're not focusing on that. So at least the pacing is kind of relatively kind of brisk there. Outside, it's revealed that Lavix actually knows about the the elven plant that they need, the kind of Narcos fruit or whatever it's called. And they find out the debuff properties of it. He helps them out. There is a sort of more notable scene where he kind of notes to Kismel that, one day you will defeat your rival, the person who broke your sword, defeated you, and stole the keys. Because you have a power that not many people of our species actually have, and that is you have a very strong connection to humanity. And so they're sort of setting up the idea that Kismel, together with Kirito and Asuna, will be able to win the Elf War quest line, and that it's this idea of the elves and humans working together that will actually kind of win the day. So that's a fun kind of dynamic that they have going on there. So they get Kismel with them. Kismel is with them when they go back to see the NPC for the casino quest line. And yeah, they basically just make the they get the details that, okay, they make the kind of anti-die thing, and the setup towards the end is just that, like, Kirito kind of comes up with a plan. He's going to, like, investigate during the middle of the night sort of on his own, and so he kind of goes to do that, and that's more or less where the book comes to an end. Before that, they do kind of come up with the idea of, like, okay, when we get to the point of the Elf War quest line, this is the floor where we're going to deal with one of the other keys, the Ruby key. And Kirito's kind of like, we basically know the key is going to attempt to be stolen. So why don't we just sort of like scope out the situation? Don't get it ourselves. Just watch and wait so we can sort of ambush the ambushers, basically. And it's a bit of a kind of plan that Kismel kind of ends up liking, that, like, oh yeah, this is the benefit of working with humans. I'd never come up with a plan like this. So at least the plan is in place for, like, the next stage of the Elf War quest line, but it's all very much just set up towards the next one, set up towards the next one, set up towards the next one. And I think even, like, just the kind of color pages at the start sort of tell you the whole thing, where, like, okay, when they go to the casino, like, Argo and Asuna wear kind of more normal clothing, and so there's a bit of a scene there that they focus on. The NPCs on the floor, who, like I said, aren't the most interesting characters, but they're fine. The loose rock path thing with the kind of blood-sucking monsters, like, they focus on that, even though I don't think it's really a standout section in the book, like, much at all. You do get the map, and you obviously have the big mysterious area here, which I guess is more like the kind of, like, labyrinth and stuff like that. But that's just this book, is that it's good start to finish, in that, like, some of the dialogue is actually quite fun, but I don't think there's that much that's like, oh, is there any Kirito Asuna, like, relationship development in here? Nothing in particular, because ultimately the book has to be relatively focused on getting through the 2-3 plots that it's dealing with, that it almost doesn't have a lot of time to have too much fun between the characters, and that Argo and Kismel are both in this book, but I wouldn't say you get that much, like, Kismel development or Argo development. It's just, they're here, there are scenes, they're nice, but there's nothing particularly to say about them, and it's just the definition of a part one of a story that doesn't really necessarily tell a full story of its own. Like, the scene with Lavix, like the Dark Elf prisoner, is actually quite good. That's probably, like, my favorite stuff in the book, because they actually managed to, you know, make a new character feel, you know, a little bit more interesting. So that was kind of good. The casino stuff I found, like, a little bit disappointing, just because the setup for it with what Kirito was talking about was very fun, and then they switched it up with the Monster Coliseum thing, and I'm wondering where exactly they're going to go with it. I'm expecting it is just a two-parter, and that Volume 8 will resolve these quests and do the boss fight on the floor as well, which I guess, like I said before, will involve some of the tricks that they learned along the way here. But yeah, just kind of waiting for Volume 8. Like I said before, probably the weakest volume so far. Previously, I felt that was Volume 6, because in reflection, Volume 5 was the part 1 of Floor 6. Actually had quite a lot going on, because that had the Morte plot, which was actually really good in that volume, and the first stage of the setup. This feels like it's kind of missing something like that. Yes, there's a little bit of discussion here about just how deep does the whole PK aspect go, and they have a little bit of a discussion with Argo about the different types of kind of game players, and how player killers are one of those kind of types of players, but they don't really delve into it all that much. But there's maybe a setup that it might overlap with it going forward. So yeah, a little bit of a disappointing volume, but still fun, because Progressive fundamentally is fun. It's always nice to go back to, like, original Aincrad and fill out the story. It's just, you know, you wait 2 years and this is the book you get. It's a bit like, come on, a bit more than that. But thankfully, like I said, I think the release date for the Volume 8 is only May, so there's not too long to wait, and hopefully Volume 9 follows not too long after. But they're my thoughts on this volume. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.